Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we explore the future and what this means for your leadership. We ask the big questions. What's happening on the horizon? What does this mean for us? And most importantly, what skills do I need now for leadership of the future? It's time to explore. Let's go.
Well, hey there, it's Zoe, and today on Planet Human, I'm still wondering about the fallout of the Russian failed insurrection. Yeah, so what happened there? It was an interesting weekend as we watched the Wagner forces march towards Moscow and then pull out and negotiate a deal. So, what could this mean is the leadership question I like to ask. And my brain goes to, yes, the war in Ukraine will soon be over. The Russians will be out of there. The Russians will be defeated. And then the next leadership question I ask is, what if we're wrong about that? It's a different kind of future, isn't it? So that's what I'm contemplating on Planet Human. On Planet Zoe, I'm getting ready for the ski season. We will be up in the mountains playing with our friends and the snow and having a great time. So winter for me is a time of hibernation quite often. It's very introspective, except for these mad dashes to the snow. So that's sort of what's coming up for me in Planet Zoe. The leadership question I have for you is this. How do you get to feel empowered? What does that actually mean? And the secondary question, which I put straight to Katherine, our guest, is executive presence dead? What does that really mean? So my guest today is Katherine Lazarus. She is the founder of Lazaruk Consulting. She started her career many moons ago as in music and then moved into image consulting and then has transformed herself into an executive coach where it is really about developing your personal brand for effective communication and influence. And we have a very forthright conversation about what is executive presence and brand and how can we leverage that to become more powerful. Let's get into it. Well, all the way from Vancouver, Canada, welcome to the show, fellow Canadian, Katherine Lazarus.
Thank you. It's great to be here tonight. Well, tomorrow for you, tonight for me.
Future past, it's all present. Yeah,
exactly.
So I'm really excited. We were talking about swearing before we clicked record, but we're not going to start the show with swearing. There might be some swearing, it might pop out. But apart from ending up as a sweary kind of poet, how did you get into your line of work? Not around poetry, but around leadership and women.
It was interesting. I actually started out my first set of careers in elementary education. So I was teaching music in the elementary schools and singing in the opera.
Wow.
And I know it seems kind of random, but that's what I was doing. And both of those careers have quite narrow parameters, and I'm not a very good small box person. But I didn't know that, and it took me 12 years and a lung tumor to figure out that maybe these careers were not for me. So when I was diagnosed, my husband said, like, these jobs are literally killing you, like, you need to leave. And
how do you get a lung tumor? You're a singer, so not a smoker?
No, they didn't know. They didn't know what it was. And so we had all the scans and we did the biopsies and everything, and they didn't know, they couldn't really tell what it was. So they said, well, we'll just watch it. And I'm like, oh, I know what this is. I was so miserable that I wished something would kill me. So here it is. Like, okay, maybe I don't need that anymore. So then when I quit, I basically said, okay, all right, tumor, thank you for showing me the way, and I don't need you anymore. You can go away now. And 6 months later, the tumor was gone, and I had a job doing corporate training at PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is a big professional services firm. So then, in between that time, I was focusing on my health and working with a coach because I just felt like I needed some help getting through things. And the coach was kind of an alpha male dude, and one day I was sitting across from him at his desk, and he said, well, what do you want to be when you grow up, little lady?
Oh my God, he did it.
Today I'd be, well, he did. He was such an alpha dude. Kind of that guy, that macho guy. And today I'd be like, you're fired. Don't talk to me like that. However, at the time, I just kind of giggled. I was like, hee hee. And I had this weird vision. I'm a visual thinker, but I had never had a vision like this before, and I've never had one since. I literally had a vision of the first company name I ever used, which was ICU Image Consulting, and the first tagline, which was intensive care for your image. And I started to laugh. I said, that's not even a thing. Like, who does that job? It's not even a job. And he said, it's a job. You could do that thing. And because there's no regulation in that industry at all, you could hang your shingle out tomorrow and say, I'm an image consultant, and nobody would blink. It's completely unregulated. So I thought, I don't know, I look all right. I've read some books. Get a website and some business cards and start practicing. So that's what I did. And I built my business for a couple of years around my day job. I don't recommend that approach to anybody knowing what I know now, because please get some training. Like, you're in somebody's underwear drawer. Please get some training for that. Like, don't mess around.
Oh my God.
Because it's very psychological.
But why are you in people's underwear drawers?
Well, in wardrobe, I'm joking, right? It's in the closet. Like, if you're doing image consulting, You're often analyzing people's wardrobes, and occasionally underwear comes up because it is a foundational garment. You know, it happens. So, that sounds very strange. So when my contract ended with the corporate job in the middle of the recession, I thought that's a great time to start an image consulting business. And my husband told me a couple of years ago, he said, I'm really glad, I thought you were crazy, but I didn't say anything. He's like, I'm glad I didn't say anything. I'm like, I'm glad you didn't say anything either, because here we are. So I did that. I went and did my certifications in image and advanced image consulting in Toronto, Canada. And then I interned with the woman who ran that company. And then she made me her Western Canada image trainer because I had education background. So in addition to my private practice, I taught consultants how to be consultants at a university college here in Vancouver. And so anyway, my clients sort of gradually moved up the chain in leadership. And then they started to say, we want you to come and work with our executive teams, but we're tired of explaining to the people who write the checks that you're not really an image consultant, that you're doing other things besides that. Like, that's just a facet of what you do, and you need to change your business. So I'm like, okay, I'll change it to Lazaruk Consulting, and now I can do what I like. A lot of leeway. And that's how I got into it. And the leadership piece came about because right now, I'm so tired of waiting for gender parity and for the system to change. And I mean, I have a lot of empathy for people who have succeeded in the leadership paradigm that we know now, because they're experiencing major cognitive dissonance because it's changing. But I just would really like to see more balanced leadership, and I'd like to see more people in power who are responsible with the exercise of that power. And so that's how I got into leadership work, and that's why I focus primarily on women. I do have some men that come and work with me, but they're very brave.
They're brave because you're scary, or they're brave because you're talking about gender?
They're brave because I talk about gender. They're brave because, I'm a little bit scary. That's kind of my stock in trade. One of my clients said to me the other day, she goes, I really love the way you kick me in the ass and pat me on the head at the same time.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. Fantastic. So you had lots of really big statements in there, that, first of all, gender pay parity is an issue. What about numbers of women in top leadership roles? Because I haven't lived in Canada for almost 30 years now. And to be honest, when I left Canada, I had no idea about gender division at all. Like, my jobs felt very egalitarian. I worked at summer camp and there was gender parity on everything. We had women bosses. Like, it just wasn't in my consciousness. And then it became part of my consciousness when I arrived in Australia. And things were a little different in different places. So what's going on in Canada?
We're still not anywhere near close to gender parity. There are more examples of women in leadership, which is great. There are more examples for us to follow. But we're not even close. It's about, I think it's 35% to 40% right now, which is okay. It's better. But in those very C-suite level, like the very high leadership levels in the companies, there are some companies I work with where there is parity. And of course, they perform better, right? Following all the rest of the data. But in Canada, even, we're still not there. We're still not there. We still have some, stale male pale action going on.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a familiar tune from where I sit.
Ugh. It's the sound of women over 40 everywhere. Ugh. And there are so many things to do that about. But, it seems to be once women hit 40, they start to be they're less concerned about what people think about them, and they're going to do what they want. But then when women hit 50, they're like, look out, you better get out of my way, because I'm definitely going to do what I want. You're not going to stop me.
I tend to agree with that. Like, turning 50 was oh God, where did I read this research? Was it with Stephen Kotler? Maybe I was listening to his podcast. And he talked about the happiest years of people's lives are between 50 and 75.
That's right. Most productive decades for women, 50 to 70.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So if you had kids, you basically got those critters out your door and doing their own thing.
Hopefully.
And so you can focus on yourself a little bit more and take the world by storm.
Yeah, you generally have more financial agency, hopefully. And you have more personal power. There's more a sense of, yeah, I know who I am and I'm not going to put up with your anymore. And I'm going to move on. And that's useful for younger women to know. I have a lot of hope for the kids these days. I've met a ton of early 20s women who really are very savvy, very relationally savvy, and they are well positioned for cutting edge, because the thing is men just haven't been socialized very well, right? To take up leadership on some levels, because they haven't got the relational ability that they need now. And there's a lot of, I think, thinking about leadership models, we're moving from this model of hierarchical, relying on authority and compartmentalized, like what's at work stays at work, and you don't mix that, your personal and your professional, to this new model, which is much more integrated, relational, and whole. So that's what my business book is actually about, is this whole presence philosophy, and it will be released in 2024. But it's this idea that what we need now are people who are highly relationally skilled. It's relational leadership. So that's why I said earlier, I have a lot of empathy. I can't remember if it was before or after we pressed record, but I have a ton of empathy for all of the leaders who have been very successful in the hierarchical model, because the cognitive dissonance that they're experiencing right now has to be incredibly difficult to manage, because nothing they're doing is working. And they're like, nobody wants to work these days. It's like, no, they just don't want to work for you in the way that you want them to work. Like one of my clients, the CEO of her company, when they started talking about hybrid arrangements and remote and in-person, started talking about people coming back to the office, and was basically sacking people who were not coming back, which is ridiculous. Like, what are you doing? And doubled down on it. And I was like, okay, is this like a hidden attrition strategy? Like, they don't want people to come back? Or, what is it? And it turned out that he was lonely. He wanted people in the office because that is where he was social. And I'm like, man, that is heartbreaking. And that's the other thing that I feel, as much as I work with women, I love men, and I feel for all the men who don't have friends who they can discuss things with, who are told that anger is their only acceptable emotion, who are told that they have to compartmentalize everything, and there's no soft place for them to land. It's brutal. It is brutal. And I really feel for that, that idea that stoicism, it's like I talk to my clients a lot about the power of the river versus the power of the rock. And the power of the rock is that armoring up. I'm shielded. I'm here. I've got big walls. It's the armor piece. And the power of the river is more of if you want to be gendered about it, it's sort of masculine, feminine, right? The power of the river is deep, wide, variable, can be very powerful. No one doubts the power of a river. It erodes all the rock eventually, goes into the ocean. It's connected everywhere, and it goes with the flow. And it eventually will overcome the power of the rock. So I think we're moving into a time where you need to remember to access more the power of the river rather than the power of the rock.
That's beautiful.
Thanks.
And I love your insight about, or observation or sharing about the people who want people to come back into the office because they're lonely. And I think that's actually not in the discussion at all. It's more the conversation about come back to the office or not come back into the office is always around accountability and visibility, as opposed to what's best for the humans on either side of the fence. And I don't think it has to be a binary choice this way or that way. It means that really the conversations that we need to be having is who are we as humans and what do we need and how can we work together better as a collective?
Yeah.
Those are better conversations.
Completely. And I think the piece that's very going to be our biggest challenge in the coming years is how do we relate? Because people say, oh, we want you to bring your whole self to work. And then people show up with their whole selves and people are like, whoa, not like that. No, that's too much whole self. Don't do that. And yet when someone comes to work and they are seen, heard, valued, understood, they're made to feel like they belong, they can bring their whole self to work, the workplace is vastly improved, but only if people understand how to handle that, how to hold space for it, how to relate to one another. What kind of skills do I need to understand this person? I need social intelligence. I need cultural intelligence. I need emotional intelligence. All of those psychological pieces that we really need and often too quickly dismiss in our interactions with people. And people that have that gift or are interested in learning about it, it is a skill, you can learn it, but you first have to admit that you're human and you need things.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. These are skills that we can develop and need to develop, because difference, in whichever format it comes, different to you, the human, it takes an emotional and cognitive load to process.
Sure, absolutely.
So if someone shows up as their whole self and you've never seen or heard or experienced a human like that, it's like, whoa, let me process that a little bit. And it takes a little bit of moving through that. And people get offended by that. I'm like, well, if you've never seen a purple turtle, you're going to look at that and go, what the hell? And then you process it.
Yeah. And once you have more exposure to purple turtles, you're like, oh, purple turtle. It exists. I think that was the biggest thing for me, because I grew up in a small town in the center of British Columbia called Prince George. It's only about 80,000 people, and it's only ever been about 80,000 people. It's weird.
I've been to Prince George.
You've been, yeah, right? You know.
It's tiny.
Yeah, it's tiny. It's a fantastic town if you have a family, you love the outdoors, you're interested in sports, you like a really simple life. If you like the arts, it's not really the place for you. So it has some really great features about it. But for me, being an artistic, creative, slightly queer person, it's like, this is not the place for me. But I grew up in this town and I didn't even know that anything like that existed. I mean, one time in high school, we went out for an honor roll lunch to a Greek restaurant and I was like, Greek food, what is that? I had never tried anything like that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I got to Vancouver, which is, still a small city. It's really the biggest small town you'll ever be in. It's still a small city, and there's only, I think, about 3 million people in the Lower Mainland. So not very many, and that's a large geographical sort of sprawling, that includes all the surrounding areas, Metro Vancouver. Yeah, I had no clue. Like, I didn't know what sushi was. I didn't eat anything outside meat and potatoes. My family was quite traditional. I just didn't have any exposure to any of that until I got to the city, and then I'm like, oh, other things exist. Other people exist. Other ways of living exist. Oh, there are other words to describe these things. Like, what is this? And it just, poof, it really broadened my horizons. And so there is some people that don't want that. And it's like, great, then stay in places where it's quieter. But don't hate on the people that are wanting to broaden their minds. And the people that want to broaden their minds don't need to hate on the people that don't want to. Unless you're disagreeing about a fundamental human right. Like if you're saying my existence is not okay, then we're going to have to relate a lot harder to one another to figure that out.
Yeah.
Right?
It can be quite messy.
Yeah. Oh, so messy. But humans are wonderfully messy. And we've been pretending that we're not, and it's a bit ridiculous.
It is a little bit ridiculous. And I want to ask you about something that I'm not sure you think is ridiculous, but you have said something interesting. Not ridiculous, Katherine. But you've said...
Sometimes I say ridiculous things. I don't know. Could come out.
It's around executive presence. And you've said executive presence is dead. And I went, really? Why? How? Tell me about that.
Well, it's interesting. So as I was putting the proposal together for the publisher for my book, one of the things you do in a book proposal is you look for other books in the marketplace and talk about what's going on, right, in the category that you might be writing in. And I was looking at the books and reading through, just sort of skimming them. And I was like, oh my gosh, this book was written in 2022 or 2023. It's like recently published. It is the same exact book that was published in 2003 about executive presence, quote unquote, executive presence. Virtually all the same content, virtually all the same tips, and all of it is designed for us to succeed in the former leadership model that is passing away. But some people are like super doubling down on that. And the issue that I have with that is that it's based in an old paradigm. And it's also largely based on an example of leadership that is historically masculine, because that was all we had. It was all dudes leading everything. So the only way that women could ascend, or people of color could ascend, or anybody else could go up the chart, is to act like the dominant group. So a lot of that advice is based on acting like a dude. And that's not how we're going to do it anymore. We're not going to do that. Because even what is that? Acting like, right? We don't even know. And I firmly believe that this alternative is the whole self piece. Because then what it does is it allows people to exist on the spectrum on which we exist. And the leadership behaviors become divorced from gender-specific things. So, for example, a relational skill, if I understand how to, if I have cultural understanding, for example. So if I pop myself down in the middle of Australia, the cultural norms in the office are going to be different than the cultural norms in Canada. So if I have an awareness of that and I can roll with that, that is not a gender-specific leadership behavior. That is just a straight up leadership behavior. So we're having to look at the behaviors differently, and we're having to look at the paradigm differently. And I think that's what's blowing people's minds, because it's like fashion or anything else. If you know the rules, you know which rules can be bent and which rules can be broken. And in order to be successful in some places, you need to know, it's like, here's the rules. I don't love the rules. We don't love the rules. But we're going to game the system a little bit, and then we're going to start changing the system. And you can only do that from a certain place of privilege anyway, right? Because I'm aware of that, right? There are places that you can't, some people just don't have access to, which is very unfortunate. But I think about this, why it's dead is because the leadership paradigm is dead. The man as leader and the only way to lead is dead. It just doesn't exist. The world is changing. And it's changing fast, and faster than we can imagine. So we need to catch up. We need to drop some of these masks more quickly, and we need to move on from this paradigm and to call it out when we see it. So a good example of that is, let's even just take the advice, quote unquote, that you might say to someone about speaking low and slow to women. Like, don't make sure your tone is not like high pitched, because then you won't be seen as credible. And I'm like, okay, so first of all, we have to think about, we want to listen to what the person is saying, and we want to be aware that the way we're perceiving that is based in a paradigm that shouldn't exist anymore, doesn't exist anymore. So I need to work harder to listen to the content of this person, but that's also helping me broaden my spectrum of understanding what leadership looks like and sounds like and behaves like, right? So in that, speaking of low and slow, well, who has low voices? Typically men, right? And slowing down can be helpful just for people to understand you, depending on where you're at. But I think it's the suppression tactics of executive presence that really bug me.
Really? Yeah. But some of those tactics are just pragmatic, I reckon. As you're talking about that, I'm thinking about that, and knowing some leaders who are dismissed because they do have a high, girly sounding voice, and there might be 50 something, and yet their voice is that of a 20 or 15-year-old girl. They don't have gravitas behind them.
Oh, gravitas.
So it's the idea of gravitas.
Sorry.
Yeah. Is that a gendered term?
Gravitas. No, it's not a gendered term.
I know. I love that word.
I know. It's a great word. I'm a big word fan. But what is gravitas? Like in your example, you said, oh, they sound like a 15-year-old. But a 15-year-old can have some weight behind their words. I mean, you look at the poet laureate from the United States, or you look at Greta Thunberg or whoever. They have weight, Malala. They have weight behind what they're saying.
Yeah.
And we interpret, acoustically, weight as a lower, heavier kind of sound. So in terms of pragmatism, it depends on the system that you're in. And it depends on who you're addressing and why you're addressing them. And those people that are operating the system, this is where I say, my question is always, why do they need to change? Because changing your vocal timbre is not necessarily an easy thing. If your voice is naturally pitched high, there is no reason that you should be dismissed as a leader on something as stupid as the pitch of your voice. Like, that's bananas. And it's going to require a lot of that cognitive adjustment to go, okay, maybe I need to listen a little bit harder. Maybe I need to change the way I think about leadership. Because let's say, for example, here's a great example. I don't know if you ever saw the show Will and Grace. It was like a United States comedy. Mm-hmm. And Karen on that show, no one doubted her authority, but her voice was like she had the squeaky voice, right? And it was hilarious, but she was very pointed and nobody questioned her. So this is my point, is all of us in leadership need to start thinking very differently about who we tap as leaders, who we see as up and comers, and start to really challenge those old pale male stale paradigms. Tired of it. Look for the content, look for the whole person, look for the actions that that person is taking, listen to what they're actually saying, and worry a little bit less about the way that they're saying it. And I understand that this is a difficult point because, as you say, pragmatic. There's an applicable piece to that. But if we just keep applying the same pieces all the time, the puzzle's never going to be any different. And it needs to be different.
I think your points about listening harder and paying more attention to the whole person are really useful. I think we need to be careful that we don't label everything as pale, stale, and male.
I know.
Just because it's been
I'm generalizing.
Existing forever.
I know. Oh, my man.
That's a hard piece, right? So how do we
them.
tease it out?
Yeah.
Like, how do we tease out the stuff that's sexist and dominating the paradigm like that versus what's universal? Because a lot of things that we're talking about is we're battling, in some of these cases, we're battling subconscious associations, biases that form part of the fabric of how we've been socialized, how we've grown up, and how we interact. And do we want to throw all of them out? Possibly not.
No. I'm not a big fan of burning it all down. I mean, there are moments when I want to burn it all down.
Sure.
I'm not going to lie. But there are definitely things that we want to retain. And there are plenty of beautiful men out there that they're older white guys, and they are amazing leaders. But what they're doing is they're not relying necessarily on authority. What they're doing is they're enrolling people. So my coach he's 70 something. He's an older white guy, but he says stuff like, but he's aware. So the first piece is he's aware, and he makes it explicit that he is aware of the systemic bias and things that exist. I think that's the first step for men that are having a hard time and they were, successful in the old model and they want to move. Demonstrate that you are aware of those things and that you're like, okay, I know these things exist. I know these things need to change. So what's my role? Who do I need to talk to? Who do I need to be? How do I need to show up in order to help with this positive change? And the second thing is that men like that are also speaking to the universal. So for example, one of the things that he says that I love, he says, it is irresponsible to consume resources and wealth and all the good things and value in the world, if you are not also committed to creating resources and wealth and value for other people.
Yeah, that's great.
Right? That is not a gendered thing. That is an egalitarian, value-based, that's not the same thing. And it's not gendered. And there are other male examples of men that do this as well, like Barack Obama, pretty neutral across the board in his language and his awareness of things that are going on in the world. There are examples of balanced men in the world, and that's what I love to see. Like, actually, I know I'm referring to TV a lot, but Ted Lasso has a beautiful humanity to the men. I love it. I love to see it because it's showing that men are also human. They are not white knights. They are not the rescuers. They might be good at that. They might be great at problem solving, but they're also not that. There's great women that are great rescuers. There are women that are great problem solvers. But it's this idea of we all have emotions. That's a human thing. We all have a system that we're working in. We all acknowledge that we are part of the system. And if we don't like the system, then it's on us to change it. Those are human things. And I think the more we focus on the universal human things, the more balanced we're all going to be. Because there are also examples of women who are very authoritarian in their lead. And it could be that they had been coached to be like that. You know, who knows what their experience was. But
Thatcher.
Thatcher, right.
Margaret Thatcher.
Totally. But she was strong, like that whole, you know, iron fist, velvet glove thing. That again is based in, she had to do that to survive. Hillary Clinton, she had to make all those changes in who she was and show a different face at every 5 seconds because she wasn't allowed to be who she was. She was vilified. So of course somebody's going to try to adapt. And then, you know, it's worse because then you're kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't. Right? So there are examples of on both sides, but I think that if the more we focus on the human interactions and the value we're creating for each other and the collective, hey, we all live in a system here. We all need to learn to relate to one another. This whole self-made individualistic thing has just gone way too far.
So we're talking about systemic change, and executive presence as a topic sort of sits on the surface as a presenting symptom of the system. And you've talked about how do we affect change? And we start by the individual and being a great listener and challenging our defaults in terms of how we perceive and approach and interact with somebody else. What other systemic things do we need to do in order to advance some of these values, advance the values of egalitarianism, of regenerative leadership practice, of being open-hearted? So how do we change the system?
How do we change? Let's just solve all the world's problems, Zoe. Let's just do it in this podcast episode. Done, dusted. What do we do to change the system? So I think representation is the first piece. But I find an issue with representation is companies will say, hey, come and play in our sandbox. And people come to play in their sandbox and then they leave the sandbox because they're like, this sandbox sucks. It's not inclusive. I don't feel welcome here. There's nothing here for me. And then people are like, why are they not in our sandbox? Our sandbox is so great. And I think the big thing that companies need to do is look at their parameters and start thinking, because I think the sort of the default is, well, people need to adjust to us. But that's not how it's working. Companies need to say, what are we doing in our policies? How are we conducting our meetings, for example? What are we expecting from our people? How are we incorporating the humanity of people in our work? Because that's never really been a thing. Particularly, like I can think of some egregious examples in professional services firms where because there was such a large influx of people, they could just burn and churn them. 80-hour weeks, no problem. You know, in law and in finance and other places. And this is somehow a badge of honor to be wrecked. And if you survive, then you were great. I'm like, who wants to survive like that? Nobody wants to live in those systems. So I think it's incumbent on senior leadership in those organizations to move away from metrics like only numerical metrics, only looking at return on investment, like dollars generated, to think about what are the other metrics that we can measure to actually ensure that we are creating a mentally healthy, collaborative workplace where everybody really has that same opportunity to move forward. So things like childcare policies, things like, you know, it's not necessarily about, like, they sometimes have really, really severe grid structures. You must do this, and then you must do this, and then you must do this to get that. Instead of looking at who is this person and what are the skill sets they have, and let's match the skill sets to the jobs rather than matching, like fitting the person into the box of the job. What do we need as a diverse skill set in our company, and how do we make jobs fit that as opposed to the other way around?
And that's a lot harder to do.
Much harder. And it takes more time. So we also have to break our addiction to speed.
Yeah. Okay. That's probably a good time to press pause and go to change of pace, the fast five.
And now that we just said don't speed, and now we're going fast five. Okay.
That's right.
Give her.
Exactly.
Let's do it.
Okay. Question number 1. What is the future technology you most want right now?
Replicator.
Oh, what do you mean by replicator?
Star Trek, the replicator. Earl Grey tea, hot. Or I want this kind of food, or this kind of the replicator. Like you could just tell it what you wanted and it would make it.
Okay. Yeah. I want that too.
The replicator. I need this because in my mind, I would be like, I want this perfect notebook, or like there's something I can see in my mind. And then I have to go searching for it in the marketplace. It's annoying. I need a magnetic whiteboard that's this big with this kind of wheels and this kind of actually make it so. I don't know if the replicator does that, but it would be a great technology.
Okay.
Replicator.
I like it. Replicator.
Yeah.
What's the number 2 best tip you ever got for leadership?
Be yourself. And number 2, if you're a challenger, you cannot be upset when people challenge you.
Nice. So take your own medicine.
Yep.
All right. Number 3, what's one problem at work you'd love to wave a magic wand and have be fixed right now?
All of the above, everything we talked about. I would love to see the gender pay gap eliminated and see real diversity in workplaces. I want all the things to be fixed, so it's hard to say one thing, but gender pay gap, number 1, relational skills gap, number 2, and I think that would take care of a lot of other things.
Okay, cool. Number 4, this is your thumbs up or thumbs down. So who is a leader that is doing something right or a leader that's doing something wrong?
Okay, well, I love to look for the right. So I'm actually going to pick Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand former Prime Minister of New Zealand. She humanized contact with her through her Facebook Lives. She made it normal to step down, not to be there forever. She's like, our job is done here, and my job is done, and I want to do something else. And here's why I'm leaving, and I'm leaving. I love that. I wish more leaders would do that instead of hanging on. So I think Jacinda Ardern had some really good demonstrable pieces, and also pushing back on the systems. Because who was she meeting with? There was another female leader they were meeting, and the press said something stupid about, oh, are you going to have tea, or some ridiculous question. And she was like, when was the last time you asked the leaders of the G7 if they were going to do that? And they were met, like, come on. So I appreciated that as well. So I think the leaders that are doing it right are the ones who are acknowledging humanity, gently pushing back on the systems, and sometimes kicking the systems in the ass, frankly, wherever they can, changing it up. Like, those are the people that are doing it right, understanding
She's
that we're all
definitely on
together.
the leading edge.
She is. Those are the people to watch.
Okay. Then number 5, your favorite leadership book or podcast, aside from the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast. What can you recommend?
You know what? It's not necessarily a leadership book, but a book that I really enjoyed was Small Giants by Bo Burlingham. And in that book, he talks about companies that chose to be great instead of big. And they were very values-based. They lived their values. And he shows companies that failed, like he shows companies that didn't do that, and he shows companies that did. And I thought that the examples in that book of the way that the companies were structured, the way that the leadership dealt with people, because above a certain size, there is an impersonality. Like, once you're in leadership and you're really wealthy and you're out of it, your empathy goes straight down the toilet. There's studies on that too, the correlation between wealth and empathy, and distance and empathy. It's hard to empathize with something you're not close to. So it was a great book, Small Giants by Bo Burlingham. And in fact, one of the companies, I went to see the Anchor Brewing Company in San Francisco when I was there last because of that book. And sure enough, they've just been recently acquired by Sapporo, the Japanese beer company, but Sapporo hasn't changed a thing because they really have something special there about that piece of treating people well. It's amazing.
I like that. And it fits really well with a theme that I've been exploring lately, which came when I read Kate Rayworth's book, Donut Economics. When she said,
Donut Economics. I know, I love Donut Economics. It's so great. You're the only person I've heard actually say it out loud. I love it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And that whole premise that live within your means and
That's right.
What is the purpose of business? It's not just about growth, because that's a crazy idea. That it's about creating more for all of us, not just for some of us. Nice. Okay, so that was the Fast 5. The Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast is proudly sponsored by the Amplifiers Academy. It is an online self-paced leadership development program that you can join at any time and progress at your pace. There are very short video lessons, great checklists and resources and recommendations and book summaries, all there to help boost your leadership thinking and abilities. We focus on leading strategy, leading culture, leading change, and leading performance. So if you want a go-to resource that can help boost your strategic abilities immediately, check us out, Amplifiers Academy, on the zoerouth.com website. See you there. Okay, I've probably got one last question for you, Katherine. And this whole idea of empowering women, I'm putting air quotes around that. That phrase actually makes me cringe a little.
I know, super cringe. So cringe.
So tell me, do you subscribe to that idea? Do you have an alternative idea? Or what is that idea? Do we need to have that idea?
Empowering women. Well, empowering anybody. I mean, it's a little bit overused. I encourage women to, first of all, be able to articulate and understand their value. And that's a human thing, right? What is your value? And then look at the lenses that you're applying to define value. In the workplace and going into senior leadership, it's tied pretty closely to, if you want to advance, you need to tie it pretty closely to the business objectives. So I think that women gain power when they understand the rules of the game, when they can play the game, but like 15% over the line, in the sense of, I'm going to challenge this. I'm not going to challenge it so much that I get booted off the team, but I'm going to challenge it enough that things will start to move. And I think it's not empowering. It's about women gaining power and people gaining power. Again, as I said earlier, that are responsible with the exercise of power. Because power isn't given to you just something for you to play with. And it galls me when I see people who have power that use it just for their own gain. That makes me insane. That is not the way we need to be living. So I think with this, I don't know, I don't buy into empowering women, but I do believe in getting women into positions where they have power and can exercise it responsibly.
Love it. Yeah, power is a really fascinating topic. And have you read Decker Keltner's book, The Paradox of Power?
I haven't, but I'll put it on my list.
Oh my God, that's such a good book. Yeah, that's an awesome one.
That's great. I just read a quote the other day about how books, you shouldn't be ashamed of buying tons and tons of books, because they said you need to think of your book collection like a wine collection, that you buy a book to sit on the shelf sometimes and you read it at the right time. You uncork it when you need it. And I loved that. I was like, oh, collection.
That's
okay, I'm just justifying it, but
much healthier way of looking at the book addiction.
Right. But because also then you need to be really thoughtful. This is a book I think I might read. How is this book going to serve me? How will it move my life forward? And then if you need to put it on the shelf, it's on the shelf and you can refer to it from time to time.
Yeah. And if you open it up and it's corked, you can,
yeah.
you don't have to drink
I thought
it.
this book was good. Nope, I'm wrong. Or, I got to the book 10 years too late and it was too much of the time. It's done. It's a historical artifact now.
Yeah, awesome. Katherine, where can people find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
The best place to find me is on my website. It's very old fashioned, but come to my website. It's LZRK or LZRK. How do you say it in Australia? Do you go Z or Z?
Z, I think.
Anyway, LZRKconsulting.com. And there, if you go to connect and get on my newsletter, again, it totally seems old fashioned, but that's where I talk about events. That's where I unpack some of these pieces. I write more over on my website. It's the best place to find me. And then if you want short bites and reels and stuff, then I'm on Instagram and I'm also on LinkedIn. But the real good stuff for my subscribers is on my newsletter. And it's free to join. I don't charge anything for that. And I do events and stuff that you can come to for free if you're a subscriber. So come on over and join us. Join us. One of us. Resistance is futile.
Resistance is, yes, that's right. Katherine, this has been fantastic. And I've likened some of the issues that we've tackled as like wrestling with crocodiles because they're bitey.
They are
and they
bitey.
need to be done.
Yes. Yes, they are bitey.
So thank you for sharing your wisdom and your energy and your insight. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed those two Canadians riffing. Riffing on lots of good stuff, executive presence or lack thereof, and how to change a system that does not favor women often, or people who are not white, male, pale. So apart from that, what are the key takeaways? I think there's two. From an individual leadership point of view, The tip to lean in and listen and to really pay attention to the whole person, I think, is really pragmatic and helpful for us. And the second one is a bigger picture one, is to ask questions about what are our processes doing? Are they as inclusive as they could be? Our policies, our practices like meetings, our processes like recruitment, performance review, promotions, and that kind of thing. So when we change systems, we need to look at them and have the lens of who is benefiting from this, who is being sidelined, and what can we do to make this more diverse and more inclusive? So those are the key takeaways and take actions. The tip of the week, I'm pulling out Composure again, my first leadership book from 2015. And this whole idea around executive presence is pretty important because that's essentially what Composure, the book, is all about. And there's this part in the book I remember writing about your personal presentation and needing to do some internal work, your inner demeanor and your focus and energy, and how you can fine-tune your inner voice, your energy that you present, etc. And then there's the outer packaging. And we need to be intentional about how we package our presentation. Everything carries a message, and we want to make sure we are deliberate and intentional with that message. Then I've got a list. I want to read that in context of the discussion we just had. And I say on page 44, in a Western corporate setting, the head-to-toe check might look something like this. We're talking about external packaging. Hair, clean, tidy, styled. Skin, hydrated and cared for. Cosmetics, age-appropriate, subtle, and understated. That's almost causing me to snicker there. Décolletage, modest and covered with minimal or no cleavage showing. Jewelry, simple, as high quality as can be afforded. Piercings, none that are distracting or outside of the norm. Hands, nails, neat and trim. Clothes, fit, clean, in good repair, current style. Shoes, polished, in good condition. So having read that, it does read very traditional. And is it wrong? I'm not going to make a judgment on that. I'd love to hear your opinion. What do you think about the external packaging to develop your presence in the workplace? What are some guidelines and rules of thumb that you might use, either for yourself or for those who are under your jurisdiction or care as a leader? All right, so what's coming up next in the show? We have an interview with Brandon White, who was recommended by Marty Strong, a former guest, two-time appearance guest. And Brandon and I will be talking deeply about strategy, how to do it better. So that's coming up next week on the show. Just remember that we are still in the middle of our July giveaway. If you want to get a free audiobook version of The Olympus Project, my very first full-length novel, near future sci-fi about the campaign to build the first community on the moon. It's very cool. You can just tag me on the socials mentioning the podcast, and I will reach out to you and give you one of the remaining codes, if I've got any, by the time you do this. And you can listen to the audiobook version of The Olympus Project for free on Spotify. So all you have to do is post something about the podcast, tag me in it, and there you go. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast. To find out more about leadership of the future or to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.